let me begin with you. Even though the Kremlin has dismissed the remarks made by the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, do you believe that what Zelensky has said is rather significant? He's talking about taking his peace plan to the US President next month. He also plans to discuss it, in fact, with Kamala Harris and Donald Trump. He says he realizes that the conflict will eventually conclude in dialogue. It's just that he believes that the dialogue should happen when Ukraine is in a strong position. What do you make of this statement that's been made by Zelensky?
Clearly, Neha, three things that Zelensky has been doing which are different is, first of all, he's claiming that during these 2.5 years of war, that Ukraine has on their own developed long-range missiles. Now, we don't know how, whether it is just posturing or whether Ukraine has actually developed long-range missiles on their own. Second, now Ukraine is taking war inside Russia, as far as 200 kilometers into Russia. And Kursk from August 6 is an example of some settlements, including in the neighborhood of a nuclear power plant, their forces being in occupation of that land. And just few hours before, the chief of CIA, deputy chief of CIA, has just claimed that those forces of Ukraine are going to stay in that Kursk region and are not going to give up very quickly. And third, of course, he's publicly asking West to supply long-range weapons to Ukraine and also permit Ukraine to use those long-range weapons inside Russia. The recent attacks on this Kursk power plant, Russia is claiming, Kremlin is claiming, they found some, US-made ammunitions which were trying to reach to that nuclear power plant, and they have instructed International Atomic Energy Agency to take that into consideration. Chief of IAEA has also visited that area, and in that background, he's not talking of going all the way to United States and presenting that plan, which obviously is not a peace plan. It's a plan of pushing President Putin into, coming under certain pressure to begin to negotiate and talk peace with Ukraine, which apparently looks not an easy proposition to materialize, because President Putin, of course, thinks he is sitting as national leader of a superpower, and therefore Ukraine will not be allowed in that sense to browbeat Russia, whatever the cost. In fact, already we are talking of as far as 1 billion per day cost for Russia. And Russia has sustained it over a period of time. So I think it's largely posturing to keep morale high of Ukraine under attack, with 230 attacks in last couple of, I think, 2 days or so. Apparently, it looks not going to be very effective vis-a-vis President Putin and Russia as we see now. To some extent, I think it's also partly the West, which is perhaps not very keen in putting an early end to war, and military-industrial complex perhaps would like the war to continue for a longer period of time. So instead of talking peace, they are talking of war instead. I think that is no way to end this war.
Talking about war is no way to end the war. That is, of course, a very comprehensive analysis, as always, by Professor Swaran Singh. So Swaran Singh, let me ask you this question. What do you make of the fact that Zelensky's statement about discussing a peace plan with President Biden comes just days after Prime Minister Modi's visit to Kiev? The Prime Minister, of course, told President Zelensky that India is willing to offer its full support and assistance in restoration of peace in the region. He subsequently spoke to President Biden on the phone and briefed him about his visit to Kiev. He also spoke to Russian President Vladimir Putin and talked about his visit to Kiev and the talks he had had with President Zelensky. Now, I'm not suggesting that there is a direct link between the two, but the question really is that if Zelensky is indeed willing to talk peace, what kind of a role, if at all, you believe New Delhi can indeed play? Let's not forget, Zelensky, soon after the Prime Minister left Kiev, actually said India can host the second peace summit.
Indeed, I think India not just can, India is already playing a certain role in the Ukraine crisis. It may not be the grandstanding of the Swiss Peace Summit or even the 13-point proposal that Wang Yi of China had suggested last year, which have not reached anywhere in the sense that the other side has demolished. Wang Yi's proposal was demolished by Western powers. Swiss summit was not attended by Chinese. Of course, Russians were not invited. That is where I think India's contribution becomes very, very interesting because it is largely snail pace, almost piecemeal, behind the curtains. And if you read some of the Western press, they believe that Prime Minister had carried a message from President Putin to President Zelensky. I'm not sure if that is how it is. But as you mentioned, following his Prime Minister's visit to Kiev, we had conversations with both President Putin and President Biden. So India is, in that sense, in a very subtle fashion, is playing a certain role. Of course, India has been providing humanitarian assistance on the ground. And I think most important was that I believe about 2,500 Indians who are kind of permanently settled in Ukraine had been kind of target of certain anger among Ukrainians, given India's proximity to Russia. India's Prime Minister visiting Kiev made a huge difference in their life. So India is playing a certain role, already is what I am underlining. But as far as the discussion on this peace proposal of Zelensky is concerned, I think this is nothing but, just simply posturing in my understanding, because in June only, Zelensky himself was on record to say 50% of power production of Ukraine has been destroyed. And if you notice, the attacks again are focusing on infrastructure, oil storage, and basically energy facilities, which could increase blackouts that are already happening across Ukraine. And if you look at in that kind of sense of being pushed to the wall, whereas Russia over the last 2.5 years had started with a position that they want written guarantees from United States, from NATO, they have now become much more pragmatic to say we only need a pledge from Ukraine to say they will not join NATO. Whereas Ukraine on the other side is not just now asking that we should see Russian forces going back to where they were in February of 2022. They are now talking in much larger messages they are giving, saying even for future such expansionist policies of Russia, we need to deal with that imperialist thinking of President Putin, and saying, like President Putin has, done things not just in Donetsk and Luhansk, but also in Georgia, Moldova, Chechnya, Dagestan, and so on. They're bringing so many other issues on the table. So they are actually increasing, escalating their vision of what could be leading to the peace talks, which makes it virtually difficult. And even this peace proposal is an idea that he's throwing up, saying we will push President Putin by using weapons, going deep into Russia, and create a situation where President Putin will have no choice but to come to the negotiating table, which seems rather audacious thinking. I think if you look at what has happened in the last 2.5 years, Russia has enormous large territory and their supply lines are very secure compared to what can be done to Ukraine, what has been done to Ukraine. Even the most conservative estimates of World Bank are saying that $160 billion worth of destruction has already happened on the ground in Ukraine. President Zelensky himself is on record to say about a couple of months back, saying 31,000 soldiers of Ukraine have died. Others have given much more estimates. UK talks about 350,000 people having died in Ukraine side on the war. So I think it's a sense of increasingly coming under pressure that this posturing is being done. I think also partly to utilize the fact that President Joe Biden is going to leave office, he's looking at his legacies, and look at the fact that on Kursk, the statement is coming from Chief of CIA saying that the Ukraine forces are going to stay there, they are not going to leave. So I think it's basically a contest between the United States and Russia, in which Ukraine, I think, has increasingly, become what looks like a ping pong ball between two major powers, and Ukraine has to find its face-saving, possibilities. And it looks like those possibilities are becoming increasingly difficult now.
Well, I think it would be correct to say that from the beginning, it really has been a proxy war between